everybody for joining us. We're glad to be back for our webinar Wednesday. We have a joint presentation today. We'll be doing an industry update after our feature presentation here. We have, we're starting off with the state of the restaurant tech report. It's going to be presented by our preferred technology partner, SpotOn. They're going to be covering the key takeaways from this survey, talking about how restaurants are tackling the labor issues head on and answering some questions when you have them. As always, we are recording this and we'll send it out. With that, I'm going to pass this over to Ben and Caitlin.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we're thrilled to be here, thrilled to be a partner of PRLA. For those that don't know who SpotOn is, we're a hospitality technology company. We support everything from POS to gift cards to reservations, online ordering, website design, maintenance, loyalty, rewards, scheduling, and tip distribution and payroll mapping. So we'll talk about the tail end of that today. Just for some context, we had 3 rounds of funding in the past 18 months. So it's been a wild ride for SpotOn. We acquired 3 companies also in the past 18 months. We've had 400 feature releases and software improvements as well. Just about 8,000 restaurants nationwide on the SpotOn platform. And we support everything from food trucks to food halls to Michelin-starred restaurants, you name it. So we can do fast casual, quick service, full service, and even ghost kitchens. So really runs the gamut in terms of functionality and things we're able to offer. My name, as was mentioned, is Ben Gleiner. I'm a Director of Strategic Accounts here at SpotOn. So I support our multi-unit and mid-market initiatives for the organization. Ultimately, you know, I love where I get to play within the SpotOn sphere, because we get to really dive into the software and make sure that it supports our community of restaurants in a big way. So anything above 5 units is what I'll support. I've been in the restaurant business since the ripe young age of 16, worked my way up in operations here in New York City, and worked at, you know, the Waldorf Astoria for a long time. I worked for Chef Laurent Torrendell, Tyler Florence out in California. And I think ultimately, you know, we're sort of on the precipice of a really exciting time for hospitality technology. It's a blossoming industry in its own right. And we're excited to be along for the ride. Caitlin, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, Caitlin Riemann-Snyder. I also have a background in the restaurant industry. I started working in restaurants when I was about 18 as a busser, and worked my way up. Worked as manager and food and beverage director for a multi-location hotel. And then I ended up working at the restaurant where we developed what was once referred to as Dolce software, now Teamwork. And we were really proud of the tool that we created. We designed it to solve our own needs, and then decided we wanted to share it with everybody else. And that's how we teamed up with SpotOn.
Awesome. Well, I think to start, you know, and kind of the data that we've collected thus far, you know, after 2 years of the pandemic, we really wanted to, you know, tackle the various challenges and look at the future for our community of restaurants and support partners like the member community of the PRLA. As we all know, the conversation around restaurant tech adoption changed during COVID significantly and increased the speed of adoption. What we're hearing, you know, consistently is that restaurant partners want to have a simple onboarding and they just want to make sure that it works, right? You know, restaurant operators, I think, quickly realized on the heels of the pandemic that ignoring the digital presence in the space is effectively money left on the table. What it does, the technology, is it opens up an entirely different revenue stream to be able to tackle your online presence, QR code presence, and the like. So we also really enjoy the fact that we're able to lower the barrier of entry for a lot of our restaurant partners to make sure that they don't have significant hardware costs. The implementation is very smooth. So what we did was we surveyed 300 independent and small chain restaurants with a platform called Technomic in August of 22 to find out the challenges they're facing. And the tech they're using today and their plans for investment in 23. So that's kind of what we'll talk about today. What we saw was the recent adoption over the past 2 years was significant both across front of house and back of house. We've seen critical value adds from a front of house perspective that have been very much retention-based products. So self-service ordering, right? Back of house, we've seen scheduling, i.e. Dolce, and accounting as the top two. What happens in the space? What are restaurants actually using from a technical perspective? So we're seeing that 81% of operators are still using legacy point of sale, believe it or not. So there's a great deal of opportunity in general. We're seeing 75% are likely going to convert to a new technology system in the next 12 months. And fine dining restaurants are actually really leading the charge in that capacity. They're really starting to look for new tech solutions. And while POS remains the leading technology, what we've seen historically, other forms of restaurant tech are emerging. So in the front of house, loyalty programs, QR codes, online ordering are the most popular to help improve a team's guest experience. And then in the back of house, as you see here, we're seeing things that streamline the administrative overhead for a lot of these operators. So employee scheduling up to 24% and accounting platforms up to 25%, which is really nice. So in terms of the general marketplace and where the industry is heading, we're seeing a huge consolidation. So that's why we're so thrilled with somebody like former Dolce, now Teamwork, being a part of the SpotOn family. We also learned a lot from the pandemic in terms of tech adoption, but we're seeing that the industry has very much pivoted in a big way as well. So we're kind of navigating a new climate on the heels of the pandemic by way of things like supply chain issues and labor shortages and what we're seeing to be a significant increase in inflation. So we're trying to figure out how to tackle that, right? And when we asked operators what challenges they're facing and what they expected to see in the next 6 months, it was exactly what you see here. So rising costs, labor costs, overhead operationally, both front of house and back of house. And when we talk about these rising costs, we talk about, hey, how do we tamper that down? Not just from a supply chain perspective, but how do we make sure the technology becomes a revenue generator for you versus a cost center in conjunction to offset these different inflationary components? So we'll get to that, but ultimately, other challenges operators anticipate facing is employee retention, right? So making sure your staff is happy, you're not seeing a lot of turnover. Cool. So what we continue to hear is operators would like to reduce their administrative overhead, right? And get back to being in front of house with their guests, with their staff. And they're drawn away from this in large part because of the overhead in the back office. So what does that mean? You're seeing upwards of 16 hours in a given week, 2 days a week, allocated directly to this administrative piece, whether it's payroll, whether it's tip distribution, whether it's scheduling, whether it's reconciliation on the scheduling front. All of that is a major factor and detracts, right? So depending on the size of the restaurant operation, they might have to even pay a dedicated resource to absorb some of these requirements, which is, again, additional cost, additional overhead. So again, all in the spirit of making sure that you're able to consolidate this, have it automated, is what we'll chat about from a teamwork perspective. Great. So from here, Caitlin, I'll kick it to you. Maybe you can talk to employee scheduling.
Yeah. So thinking about employee scheduling, and I also want to talk a little bit about compliance with this. So what would it mean, like for me personally, the amount of time it would have saved if when I was going to build a schedule, compliance tools were built into it. So I didn't have to spend time researching and worrying about that. Like that would have saved me time, Ben. I'm assuming you too.
Oh, 100%. And I worked in both standard labor environments and union environments. So making sure that we had it as meticulous as possible took hours upon hours.
Yeah. And also just appreciating that labor laws aren't static. They're changing all the time and they're coming at you pretty quickly. So when you have a tool that has features built in to help you understand, that gives you not just, hopefully a couple hours of your week back, but a little bit of your mental health back. And so to like shoulder some of that burden and that stress for you. The other thing that we do is we make it so that you can manage your schedule, you can manage your labor, you can manage compliance, verify time punches, all in one place. So you're not signing in to 7 different screens. And that was one of the things that when I was managing and I was complaining to my then boss about how there's not a platform that lets you do that. One of the main things that we were looking to solve, right? Like having everything in one place, that makes your life easier. You're not going to 7 different pages. It's all just right there. On top of that, having things that say, hey, you probably don't have enough servers scheduled right now, little tools that help make that simple. The other thing that we have built into that same area is tip distribution. And again, like for me, at the end of Sunday brunch, the last thing that I wanted to do was sit down and spend 30 minutes taking numbers and plugging them into an Excel sheet or manually doing the math so that I can hand everybody tips. Having a tool where you can say, hey, these are our tips distribution rules. We're not going to force you to change them to fit. We're just going to set up something that does what you need. You click a button, it happens. We say 60 seconds or less. Really, we expect it to be more like 15, 30 seconds a day spent on tips. And it's mathematically perfect. There's no human error ever. Everything's flowing directly into the point of sale. And then you can choose how much of the puzzle you want to share with your employees. Another thing with tips that I think has really become a struggle in a post-pandemic world is paying employees tips on a daily basis. A lot of servers and bartenders like to walk with cash at the end of the night. We have things like pay cards or an integration with Kickfin so that you don't have to be responsible for keeping that much cash on hand, but you can still pay employees their tips on a daily or regular basis. So things that make the system of tip pooling transparent, they eliminate potential human error or favoritism because it's just mathematically perfect. And it's available to the employees. I think that helps you from again, managing your time and being able to spend more time working with your employees and building a team environment instead of spending your time, writing numbers in a little Excel sheet. All of those things help build a happy work environment, and they also make your job easier.
So Caitlin, let me just ask you a question for the group at large. If I'm running a steakhouse in New York City and I have a la carte service in the main dining room, I have a private dining room that has autograt, and then I have an upstairs event and they've received cash tips, what does that general distribution look like?
It really depends, but often we will see, in the private dining room, only the people that are working that event are included in that tip pool. So we've got that coming in through a common ring code. And if you're not on that team, you're not going to be included in that tip pool. When we're talking about our fine dining service, you'll often see things like servers are going to tip out bartenders X amount of bar sales, and bar sales include glass pour wine, but they don't include bottle pour wine. And we're able to separate those categories out because the server is responsible for opening the bottle at the table, or the som is responsible depending on the restaurant, right? Those tips for bottle service should be going directly to the som. So being able to direct tips different ways for different positions is really, really key. The auto gratuity sometimes has a completely different set of tip distribution. And it's also normal in cases where some money does go to like prep cooks as far as tip outs to have the kitchen pooling based on a week, like to set up a weekly pool for the kitchen, whereas the front of house is pooling on a daily basis or per shift. And just to know, the main takeaway is that we can do it. Like, we just have the most robust tip distribution tool. It's one of the things that sets us apart. And I don't feel guilty or conceited saying that because it's just true.
So I think when I was talking to Tomas, who runs Fearless Restaurants outside of Philadelphia and in Philadelphia, he was saying one of his favorite pieces was the fact that he could assign gratuities to both front of house and back of house, to revenue generating staff and non-revenue generating staff. And then on the heels of that, you have things, to your point, of daily pay where the back of house staff can collect those gratuities in real time at the end of the day versus waiting until the end of the pay period?
Yeah, it is about creating technology that conforms to what people need instead of creating a technology that requires people to like change to fit within our parameters. That's not what we're doing. We're making something that's going to fit your needs, and that works for counter service, and it works for fine dining. It's just that the needs are different, and we customize based on what we're asked to do.
Awesome. And how about payroll?
Payroll. So the woman at Four Corners Management, the first time we submitted payroll together, cried because she said she felt like she was getting her life back. And that's our goal. You know, what would it mean to you if you didn't have to spend 5 hours, 3 hours submitting payroll, especially if you're processing payroll on a weekly basis? You've got your schedule in the same place. It's the same place where you've handled tips. It's the same place where you're handling 80/20 labor compliance, tipped wage compliance, overtime. You know, do you have employees working who are under 18? All of that is housed within one place. The process for submitting payroll when you are working with one of our integrated partners, which is Paychex, ADP, Paycom, Paylocity, Paycor, Gusto. Gusto in particular, we're creating a white label service. So you will get, will probably end up being even more simple than this, but you click a button and everything transfers. So it should take you about 30 minutes to review your information. You know, it is payroll. It's important. We want you still putting eyes on it, but it shouldn't be burdensome. And then you click a button, you submit, and you're done in about 30, 35 minutes. With the comfort of knowing that you followed the laws, that you've been compliant, and also that information is there and transparent for the employees to see. And that is, you can submit payroll from one place for all of your locations. So if you have 7 different locations and you don't want the manager at one location to really even be aware of another location, that separation can exist. But as an administrator, you're still signing into one place and submitting to payroll.
And what we've seen, at least on the sales side of things here at SpotOn, is all these different restaurants have different payroll providers. How many, you know, off the top of your head, payroll integrations do we have, and what does it take to integrate to a net new payroll provider if that's not already in-house?
So I think we have 7 currently going. What we do when we don't integrate, we create a custom CSV. So you have headers, columns, everything in place, perfect. It should be as simple as downloading a report and uploading a report. You should not need to manipulate that report whatsoever. We are happy to customize that for you. After we've created that custom document so you can use it, for us, if someone has a cloud-based API, we can set up the integration. And at this point, we've been vetted by ADP, and they're very serious about their vetting. We've been vetted by Paychex. We're happy to be vetted by whatever payroll company we're looking to establish. On our end, we can usually make that happen within a week. There are sometimes things that on the payroll company side where they say like, no, this can't be approved in less than this amount of time, which can put it at about 3 weeks, usually never longer than that. On our end though, we can make it happen in a couple of days. And we want to play with everybody. We want to integrate with everyone. So if they're open to it, we're ready to set it up.
Awesome. And everybody's favorite topic, compliance. How do we hedge against that?
Yeah, labor compliance, the stuff that really keeps you up at night, at least me personally. You know, you hear about a lawsuit in the news or a new law going down and you don't know how to interpret it and you're kind of scrambling. So having a tool or a partner there to help support you with that, to build those things in so that you can turn on those features, someone that will walk through and say, hey, this is what we're seeing people use in Pennsylvania. This is what this means. This is how we interpret it. And this is the result. This is how you look at this warning. Hopefully it helps you make sleep. It helps you sleep at night. And, you know, being federally compliant, not just state compliant, I think that's another big piece. And especially if you have employees working across locations. Another really big piece of this is that we make all of this visible to the employee as well. So there's not a situation where you're saying, no, we're doing everything right. You're totally fine. And you're just asking the employee to trust you blindly. They can see that they're getting everything that they're entitled to. And I think that helps make for happier employees. Like for me personally, if I feel like I'm maybe not being treated fairly, I'm not going to be as pleasant to be around, certainly. That's not the environment you want to build for your employees. So when you foster an environment where they can see that they're being given everything they're entitled to, and now I'm just repeating myself, but it makes for happier employees and a lot more trust, and you build relationships where you've got more long-term employees. You're not having to retrain them every 6 months because they're happy there and they feel respected in your work environment.
So you have compliance reporting and basically parameters in place where you can see things like spread of hours reporting, tip credit reporting, overtime reporting, and forecasting on the heels of that, which is great. But you also have in-store compliance, right? Where folks can, like management can get notifications on their mobile if somebody's clocking in early, clocking out late, not taking.
Yeah, and you can put restrictions in place like that. You can also put things like budgets in there, like, hey, I don't want my front of house manager scheduling over 14% labor between the hours of 7 and 8 p.m. on Friday night, because we shouldn't be there. And I think when a lot of these tools are built in, it just makes it really straightforward and a little bit more simple for people. So you're not spending all of this time talking to your manager about budgets. It's just built in there. They know when they're over, they know when they're under, they know what the expectations are, and it makes it easier for them to meet those expectations. Less time spent in meetings, more time spent actually out on the floor. And yes, so an employee didn't show up for work, I might want to be notified about that immediately. And just being able to track different reasons that people are late and customize that. We worked with a group in Florida on a private island where employees had to take a ferry to and from work. So they wanted to know when someone was late because of the ferry was late, as opposed to when someone was late, so that for employee reviews, things like that, they're looking at an appropriate data collection. They have the full picture of what's going on. So knowing that you can build those features in makes life easier.
Amen. Awesome. Well, we have a ton on the horizon for 2022 as an organization, and we're super excited about it. Maybe Caitlin, are you open to speaking just briefly about the roadmap for, or what you anticipate coming in the next 12 months?
Yeah, so for us, one thing that's really exciting is our app is getting a really big facelift. So the employee app is going to be best of industry pretty soon. Right now, it's a little dated. It does everything it needs to do. So we're very excited about that. On top of that, we have already established a bi-directional feed, meaning if you make an edit to someone's hours in Teamwork, it pushes back to SpotOn immediately. We're going to have it at a point where you can add a role to an employee in one place and it's flowing all the way through. So employee, you add them to Gusto with all of their paperwork, they flow into Teamwork, they flow into SpotOn. You are not adding employees 3 different times, adding wages multiple times. Right now we're able to source wages and roles from one or the other, but we're not able to push all the way through. And the fact that you will be able to push all the way through and you will have consistent records across the board, like you guys know how big of a deal that is, to not have one record of everybody's hours in one place and a different record because that's where you made time punch edits, and being able to look and audit. So consistent data completely across the board, we're very, very excited about.
Yeah, and that's a common ask from what I've seen in the space is, hey, we need one source of truth, independent of which tech stack it is. We just want to make sure that when we're inputting the data, it's translating across all of our product lines, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, look, I think it's fair to say, when you see a slide like this and it says, hey, 30K is what people are ready to invest in new technology in the coming year. I think with a cloud-based system or even a scheduling solution alone, it's a fraction of that, right? So people are ready to make the move, and that's what's so great again about the hospitality tech space right now, and what gets me so excited is again kind of a blossoming industry, and there's so many different players coming into this space between what we see at NRA and what we see at the different shows like restaurant and bar, at the tech pavilions, et cetera. You're seeing so many different areas of the product that support the restaurant space. And, with SpotOn and in partnering with PRLA, we're excited to be able to share all of these different areas of our product with you guys because, again, it's basically being a champion of Main Street operators is cutting down on costs and making sure you're able to have a product that is a revenue generator for your member community versus that, again, of a cost center where you could be like losing money with things like chargebacks, right? So, it's one of those things that, we really are laser focused on making sure that some of these restaurants in the member community are able to not just survive, but thrive as well. And we also have a nice little QR code to take a look at the lovely Caitlin and her team's teamwork product. So if you're ever interested, feel free to scan the QR code and take a look at your convenience. And thank you so much, guys, for letting us jump on and kind of speak to what we've seen in terms of the state of the industry from a SpotOn perspective. And again, we're thrilled to be partners with PRLA. So thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you both for joining us. That was a great presentation. I don't know if anybody had any questions for Caitlin or Ben. We can share them through the chat. If you don't, we'll be sure to share. Can I share your contact information with them afterwards? If you're fine with that?
Yeah, please,
Okay.
please.
Great. So we'll share their contact information when we send out this recording so that you can reach out to them on a one-off if you don't feel comfortable talking on camera right now.
And I've just chatted my email as well.
Oh, thank you, Ben. Thank you very much. All right, great. Well, I think you guys were going to stay on for the rest of this presentation. Am I correct?
Would love to.
Okay, great. So if the questions come up at the end, when Zach and Lauren are done with their presentation, maybe you can ask them then. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome back the duo of Zach and Lauren to do a legislative industry update. Kind of, oh, Caitlin put hers in there too, kind of recapping what happened last week. Let me get this presentation up for you. And we will get started here. All right, great. Can everybody see that?
We can, yeah. Thank you, Hope. Thanks, Hope. Good morning, everyone. Happy Webinar Wednesday. Welcome back. It's been a while. So nice to see everyone. I'm Zach Pyzik, PRLA's Director of Government Affairs. I'm joined today by Lauren Brinjack, PRLA Senior Director of Government Affairs. Big thank you to Caitlin, Ben, Heather, and the team over at SpotOn for all that they do to support PRLA and our members. Some of the features and systems that they discussed today seem really helpful, but specifically now in Pennsylvania, where we recently saw some of the changes to the rules and regulations around tip pooling, around tip sharing, et cetera. Those rules went into effect in early August, as many of you know. And I know operators have had some challenges navigating those changes. It sounds like SpotOn would really be helpful, a helpful resource on that front. And then, of course, there are the federal rules that were referenced as it relates to things like the 80/20 and predictive scheduling in places like Philadelphia. And so just thank you so much to SpotOn for being such a resource for our members and such a great partner. So what have we missed since last chatting, since the last time we were on the webinar? The Phillies were in the World Series. That's a big deal. That team was a great team to watch. I really enjoyed that. I'm sure many of you did as well. It's snowing now in certain places of Pennsylvania. We didn't even get to talk about all the fall foliage that we got to see the last couple of weeks. And then we have tons of election results, obviously, that we wanted to catch up with all of you about. We're excited to talk about some of that today. With that, we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I'm going to turn things over to Lauren to start us off.
Thanks, Zach. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be back on another industry update webinar. So this really was a very interesting midterm election last week. Although unfortunately, we don't have all the results still a week out. There are some races that are still being counted. The interesting thing is historically, the party that holds the White House usually takes a bit of a beating in that first midterm election in their first term. So many people and Republicans certainly were hoping for that quote unquote red wave. That did not quite materialize, especially not in Pennsylvania. We saw that the Democrats will retain their slim majority in the US Senate, even regardless of what happens in that Georgia Senate runoff race, which will happen in early December. It looks like the Republicans will retake control of the US House by a pretty slim margin, although even that was up for debate as of last week. But it does look like our Republicans will have control of that chamber heading into next year. In Pennsylvania, we saw that we had that open Senate seat. Senator Pat Toomey retired. That was Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman for the Democrats versus Dr. Oz on the Republican side. We saw, of course, that Lieutenant Governor Fetterman did beat Dr. Oz in that race, although the polls had that race neck and neck going into Election Day, and everyone was sort of on pins and needles to see how that was going to turn out. But that was an early election night victory for John Fetterman for that race. One interesting tidbit I thought is there really was an unprecedented amount of spending this election cycle. The Fetterman-Oz race was actually the most expensive race in the country, with a combined total spending, according to Open Secrets, of over $373 million between the primary and the general election combined. In the fifth place race was the Ohio Senate seat, and that came in at over $202 million. So I think that just gives you a little bit of a flavor of just how much money is kind of flowing through these political campaigns these days. And speaking of spending, our incoming governor-elect himself raised a record-breaking amount of money for his gubernatorial campaign. And I'm going to turn it back to Zach, and he's going to talk a little bit more about Josh Shapiro and what we may be able to expect from his administration next year.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. And yeah, those are record-breaking numbers, and it's been interesting to see the spending that we saw really across the nation. The other thing, before I talk about our governor-elect here, the other thing I wanted to mention is we saw a lot of split-ticket voting in states like Nevada, states like Arizona, states like Georgia, and even here in Pennsylvania, you see, even though Lieutenant Governor Fetterman did end up winning that race, you did see somewhat of a drop-off between folks in Pennsylvania who voted for Attorney General Shapiro and folks who voted for the Lieutenant Governor. I think last I looked, there was a couple 100,000 votes separating those two candidates. And, you know, I don't know what that means necessarily going forward, but it is, I think it's nice to see that people are, again, kind of taking a closer look at candidates. And it's not just this election, at least it wasn't all about parties. And with that, we now know, we officially know who our next governor will be in Pennsylvania, despite feeling like we kind of knew who it was going to be about a year or two, just because of the, you know, he held a very healthy lead in the polls for quite some time now. Governor-elect Josh Shapiro will be Pennsylvania's next governor. He lives in Abington, Pennsylvania, down here in Montgomery County. He's been a state representative before, in fact, elevating to leadership at some point in the early 2000s. He was a Montgomery County commissioner, ultimately going on to be selected as the chair of the Board of Commissioners here in Montgomery County, went on to be Attorney General. I think it was interesting to note, too, that when he ran for Attorney General the first time, his Attorney General races had always overlapped with a presidential. And even in those races, Josh Shapiro was the top vote getter over Hillary Clinton, President Donald Trump, and President Joe Biden. And again, that's just interesting because I think what's important to kind of note here is I think he's really going into this term with quite a mandate from voters in Pennsylvania. Governor-elect Shapiro has been a friend to tourism here in Pennsylvania. We expect him to be an ally when it comes to items like tourism funding. I know he's been very involved with different tourism groups, especially when he was a Montgomery County commissioner down in Valley Forge. There may be some differences when it comes to certain regulatory decisions that he's going to likely address. Something to keep in mind, Governor-elect Shapiro is very ambitious. Not to say that Governor Wolf isn't ambitious, but as it relates to their political careers, I would say Governor-elect Shapiro, unlike Governor Wolf, is very interested in perhaps running one day for some form of higher office. Some in general may not like that, but for us lobbyists, I think it gives us a lot of insight and helps us with expectations as we do our planning into 2023. And I think the big takeaway there is that I think that Governor-elect Shapiro will be looking to cut some deals. He's going to look for common ground. He's going to want to work with a lot of stakeholders throughout the state and constituents to really hopefully accomplish a lot. And I really think he's going to want to work with both sides to get things done. And I think there's going to be a lot more appetite in Harrisburg to do that because no matter how you cut it, it's likely that the House, whether or not the Democrats get the majority in the PA House or not, it's still too early to tell. It's likely that they're going to be within striking distance. And so with a slimmer majority there in the House, I expect a lot more compromises, a lot more deals to be reached. The swearing in for Governor-elect Shapiro is going to be on January 17th, 2023. And you know, again, what can we expect? I think tourism funding, there'll likely be some significant conversation happening on that front. You know, Governor Wolf used a lot of his political capital in budget season on advocating for more funding for education. He ran on a platform, Jobs That Pay, Schools That Teach. He invested a lot more money into rural healthcare facilities, urgent cares, rural hospitals, and also long-term healthcare facilities. But he wasn't necessarily the biggest proponent of increased tourism funding. And I think Governor-elect Shapiro will have a slightly different perspective on that subject. Fingers crossed, but PRLA is looking forward to having conversations with the transition team but before the new governor is sworn in on some other items like regulations. You know, I don't want to scare anybody, but I do think that we're going to be having conversations about a minimum wage at some point in 2023. I don't know what that will look like, but I do think it's going to surface. I do think there will be conversations about the tip credit here in Pennsylvania, as it relates to that minimum wage conversation. And so these are just a few things we want to get on your radar. But that said, we are looking forward to working with Governor-elect Shapiro. And now we want to talk a little bit about those competitive races we've seen in the Senate and the House.
Thanks, Zach. So we know going into next year, the makeup of our Pennsylvania State Senate is going to be much the same as it is now. Republicans are going to definitively retain the majority there, 28 seats to Democrats, 22 seats. Some notable races there. Republicans really were looking to flip a seat in the Berks, Chester, Montgomery County area, current Senator Katie Muth's seat. She did end up defeating her challenger, Jessica Florio, so she will be back for her second term next year. Current state representative Rosemary Brown did win her election. She will be taking Senator Scavello's current seat in the Monroe County area. And current state representative Greg Rothman in the Cumberland County area won his election. So he will be a new sitting state senator going into next year. I think the more interesting story for this election was certainly what happened in the state house and what is still the sort of fallout of that election. We still don't know as of right now which party is going to control the state house chamber in 2023. I think Democrats outperformed nearly everyone's expectations in that chamber. We knew going into this election that because this was the first general election with the newly drawn district maps, that things were a bit more competitive for Democrats, especially in some of those southeastern Pennsylvania seats. So we were expecting that perhaps Democrats would gain a few seats. We did not think that it would be possible that they would come within striking distance of actually flipping that chamber for the first time in a decade, but as of now, they certainly could. There are 2 seats where the results have not been called yet. As of right now, and this could change later today, really, Democrats have won 101 seats. Republicans have won 100 seats. There are 2 seats left in the southeastern part of the state. Incumbent Republican Todd Stevens currently is up over his challenger by maybe a handful of votes, I think a dozen votes. And then in the Bucks County area, that was an open seat where the current representative Frank Ferry won a Senate seat. So that was an open seat election, and it looks like the Republican in that race may win that seat, but both races right now are still too close to call. There are a handful of provisional ballots that are still being counted. We're hoping to hear the results of those elections later today, but hopefully, certainly by the end of this week. Republicans, well, the state house was supposed to hold their leadership elections this week in Harrisburg. They've had to push that off until next week because we still don't know who's going to control the chamber. But as Zach noted, whoever does is really going to hang on to that majority by the skin of their teeth. So it's really going to be interesting to see what happens next year. Maybe we can go to the next slide, and I'll note some of the notable races there. We did lose a handful of incumbents, especially in the southeastern part of the state. Current Representative Chris Quinn from Delaware County lost his election. Representative Todd Polinchuk from the central Bucks area lost his election to his Democratic challenger as well. And then there is incumbent, as I mentioned before, incumbent Representative Todd Stevens in Montgomery County, who right now is sort of the key to the Republicans hanging on to that majority. So he is by far now the Republicans' favorite legislator in the state right now, because he may be the one that keeps them in the majority. So we're certainly kind of waiting to see how that all falls out. So although there's a lot that's unknown, what we do know is that going into next year, there will be at least 51 new state house members. So 1 in 4 1 in 4 house members next year will be in their freshman term. So there are going to be a lot of introductions that Zach and I will be doing over the next couple of months, and a lot of education about PRLA's legislative priorities. Although much is still up in the air, we do have some ideas of what's going to happen, how the new legislative session at least is going to start off organizationally. So I will turn things back to Zach to kind of give an overview of that.
Yeah, and Lauren, if I can, a few things that I would add to about the House elections. You know, if you have any of those friends, or if you're like me, maybe an uncle that might not vote in an election, and you've tried to convince them in the past that you really need to vote, look no further than to point them to that Representative Todd Stevens race, because this is a state house race. This is a state house election that's going to be decided at the end of the day, probably by 6 or 7 votes, maybe even less than that. And so it's really shocking stuff. That's in the Lansdale area. We knew that was going to be a close race. You might have seen that the House Democrats at some point or another a couple of days ago, they did come out and they did announce that they have claimed the majority in the House. We do not believe that necessarily to be true over at PRLA. We haven't seen any media outlet pick that up yet. I've been in those war rooms before, where they're, a candidate is deciding, or a campaign is deciding, do you make the announcement or not, that you have and obviously you're working off of the data that you have. That said, that race, like the Rep. Todd Stevens race, there are about 250, 260 provisional ballots that are still being counted. So from the way we look at it, things are a little too close to call right now. And then the other factor at play, or what will be at play a couple weeks from now, is that there, like Lauren started mentioning, there's going to be 3 state rep seats that immediately go to special elections. Austin Davis was elected, re-elected to the House, but also elected as lieutenant governor. You cannot hold both of those seats at the same time, despite a conversation Lieutenant Governor Mike Stack had in the similar realm a couple of years ago. And so at some point or another, close to January, Austin Davis would have to resign that House seat, if he gets sworn in at all, in order to take office as lieutenant governor. Also Anthony DeLuco and Summer Lee, those will be 2 special elections as well. And so the point I'm trying to make here is we might not really know who holds a true majority for a couple months, but what we may see is one party have majority by rule, but not necessarily the votes to actually control that agenda. And a good example where that could be impactful is when you're elected as Speaker of the House. because oftentimes these conversations go to the full chamber. So a lot that we're still paying close attention to. Lauren and I, we are proud to report that more than 90% of the elected officials that we supported financially through the PRLA PAC this year will be returning to Harrisburg in 2023. We're really excited about that. We've through the direction of our board and our leadership here at PRLA, we've really been putting a bipartisan effort at supporting candidates in election season. And we feel that PRLA is in a really good position to start these conversations in 2023. So legislative sessions here in Pennsylvania are 2 years long. This will be the end of the 2-year legislative session at the end of 2022. Not much runway left here. Everything bad that we were fighting against dies on the vine. So that's a good thing, right? If there's a mandate that we didn't want to pass or any generic piece of legislation that the industry wasn't supportive of, if it doesn't pass pretty much by the end of this month, it's dead. And what we're hearing right now in Harrisburg is there's not going to be much action at all on anything that's not just completely agreed to by every chamber and perhaps even the governor. The other thing, though, and this is the negative aspect of it, everything we were fighting for also dies. Ultimately, all bills will have to be refiled, repurposed, rewritten even, and reconsidered in 2023, which will be the start of the new 2-year session, 23-24. Leadership elections have already started. That's what we call that in Harrisburg, the reorg process. That process has already started in the Senate specifically, not in the House, because like Lauren noted, there's just too many TBDs over there in the House for them to have that conversation. Senate leadership will be led by President Pro Temp Senator Kim Ward. Senator Ward will be the first female to ever hold that position in the PA General Assembly, which is a really big deal. We're super excited to continue working with Senator Ward as President Pro Tem. She's been a big ally of PRLA's in the past, and congratulations to Senator Ward on that new position. Senator Joe Pittman will be Majority Leader. Senator Ryan Almond will be the Majority Whip, and Senator Martin will serve as Majority Chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, which many of you know is a very, very important committee. That committee, any bill or legislation or budget bill that has anything to do with spending money here in the state goes through appropriations, and that will be chaired now by Senator Martin. And so you'll see there the Lancaster delegation is really rising the ranks, kind of getting fast tracked here in Republican leadership. In the minority caucus, State Senator Jay Costa will remain minority leader of the Democratic caucus in the state Senate. Senator Vince Hughes will remain the chair of the minority chair of the Appropriations Committee. One noteworthy change, Senator Tartaglione will now serve as whip, replacing Senator Tony Williams. And there's some speculation as to why that might be. But definitely something we're keeping an eye on. Something else we're looking closely at after leadership is selected. Now the conversation starts in the Senate, and then ultimately after leadership is selected in the House, it starts in the House on who new committee chairs will be. There are more chairs up for grabs than I've seen in a long time. In fact, I'm not sure of this, but it might be ever. I don't know if we've ever seen this many chairs available at one time, given that there's going to be about 50 new elected officials in Harrisburg. A few that I wanted to note here: House Tourism. No matter how you cut it, they're going to get a new chair, either because if the Republicans keep the majority, Chairman David Millard did retire. He did not run for re-election, and so Chairman Millard will have to be replaced. Or if the Democrats take the majority, Democratic State Rep Mary Jo Daley will get the gavel, and she will ultimately become the majority chair. She's been minority chair this last session. The Senate Tourism Committee, which is, they've got a fancier name, the Senate Committee on Community, Economic, and Recreational Development, that is currently chaired by Senator John Udicak from the Carbon County Jim Thorpe area. He also did not run for re-election. He is retiring, and so there will be a new majority chair coming out of the Republican caucus for the Senate Tourism Committee, which we're expecting to hear about soon. And then back in the House, the Labor and Industry Committee, currently chaired by Representative Jim Cox. He did not run for re-election. That L&I committee handles a lot of legislation regarding things like wage mandates, scheduling mandates, paid leave, that sort of stuff. And so that's a committee we work with often. another new chair will be assigned to that committee. And so, as you can see, there's so many changes. The silver lining, what we really see at PRLA is a lot of new opportunity. If you're not somebody who currently advocates often, if you don't engage your legislator often, but you're interested in doing more of that, now is the best time to start. Because next year when you start meeting with these legislators, you could pretend you've been doing it for years, because there'll be a lot of freshmen in Harrisburg, and PRLA is very excited for some of the events that we'll be rolling out, like our second annual advocacy boot camp, where we're going to help provide you all with the tools and resources you need to effectively advocate for the priorities most important to you. So we really see this as definitely new platforms, new challenges and conversations we're going to have, but similarly, a lot of new opportunity, and we're really excited for that. With that, Lauren, wanted to turn things over to you to discuss some of PRLA's priorities in 2023.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. And I'll just follow up on what you said by noting that we really do, one of our goals next year is to make sure that we're connecting our members with their legislators as early in the year as possible, and really establishing some of those relationships with the freshman legislators, this whole slew of 51 incoming House members with their hospitality constituents as early as possible. And we think that will pave the way for some great relationships moving into this new 2-year legislative session. We at PRLA have a policy committee that is made up of our 3 internal committees that vet all of our legislative issues. We are going to be meeting in January of next year, and during that sort of policy committee retreat, we're really going to be hammering out what our legislative priorities are going to be. We'll be playing offense, but certainly defense, and some of those issues I think are really going to hinge on who's in control of the House next year, which as I mentioned, we're still waiting to determine. Certainly tourism funding, increasing that budget line item is going to be at the top of our list going into next year. And as Zach noted, we are already kind of laying the groundwork there to start advocating for that with Governor-elect Josh Shapiro's new team. So I think a lot of exciting things are going to be happening next year. I wanted to also piggyback on what Zach said about the 91% of PRLA PAC supported candidates returning to office or coming into office next year. We always say that good legislation starts with good legislators. And so that and the extent to which we're able to support the campaigns of legislators who really are friends of the hospitality industry, who understand our issues and who are interested in learning more about our issues, is really critical to our government affairs program here at PRLA. And so I would encourage all of you who are interested, if you haven't made a contribution to our PAC this year, please do so. Even though this election has just finished, as I mentioned at the top of our presentation, with that $373 million spent in one Senate race, fundraising for elections never stops. There will be legislators beginning their next campaign in January and February next year. So we're ready to hit the ground running, even with our PAC spending. So please feel free to reach out to either Zach or I if you're interested in learning more about our PAC, and I would encourage all of you to get involved in supporting it. And with that, Zach, if you don't have anything else, we are happy to take any questions that may come up.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Happy to check out the chat here and answer any questions. And to your point, Lauren, yeah, campaign season has already started. Clearly, if I don't know who got a chance to tune into the big announcement last night, you probably saw former President Donald Trump has announced that he's now running for president. And I also, in Philly, we've got a lot of, I think Councilmember Dom just recently announced that he'll officially be running for mayor. And, there's a few other candidates that have already thrown their hat in the ring as well. And so, like Lauren noted, we're despite the fact that we're still kind of counting results here for the last election, we're full steam ahead into next year. And we're really excited about all we have on the horizon. Heather, you're that boot camp, we're really excited for it. This was something our DMO members, this was an idea of theirs last year. We hosted it at State College, and we had a great time, and we felt like it was a really productive event. Looking forward to having our second annual boot camp, probably February or March. And this will be complementary to some of our other efforts, like a lobby day, like a district office day blitz, where we're going to help our members and operators schedule meetings in their district offices with legislators. And Lauren and I are going to travel the state and accompany folks at those meetings. So the boot camp will likely be before the National Restaurant Association's Public Affairs Conference in April. Our lobby day will likely be after. I think I want to say those dates are April 3rd, 4th, 5th-ish, around that time, early April, and we'll be having the lobby day after that. With that, Lauren, Hope, I'm not seeing any other questions come in the chat here. I can put my contact information, and you guys know how to reach Lauren and I. Never hesitate to reach out if we can be helpful. But really excited for 2023.
Sure. Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Lauren. Just real quick, if you aren't subscribing to our daily email update, please make sure to do that. There's a QR code for you to get signed up for that, or you can reach out to us at the office and we'll get you signed up. We also do have the slide back from SpotOn with their QR code. I do see a few things in the chat, but I think it was just everybody saying they appreciate you guys. I don't know, Ben and Caitlin, if you want to say any last words before we get going.
No, once again, just thank you for being on, and we love PRLA. Ben, and I always butcher this. Felicia's been awesome from our conversations. So again, excited about the partnership and looking forward to 2023.